Welcome everyone. This is the first AGI, Asia Global Institute. I have to say it every time because AGI also stands for Artificial Generative Intelligence these days. But this is the first our AGI public policy seminar this year. I do mean 2025, not the year of the snake. But by the way, we're still within the first 2 weeks of the Chinese or Lunar New Year. So Happy New Year, everyone. Today, we are very honored to have Professor Dan Trefler flying in all the way from University of Toronto to tell us a little bit about his most recent research. And this is sort of like a preliminary set of thought about a new book that he's working on at the intersection between AI and international trade. So over lunch, Dan and I and my colleagues were chatting about how he came up with this idea to study the relationship between AI and trade, because we usually think about how AI affects finance, labor market, etc. And it's not so straightforward for me as a trade economist to think that these two things have any relationship. And I really think that Dan is an expert on this, and he's the first person, in my opinion, in economics to write about the relationship between AI and trade. Dan needs no introduction. In my opinion, probably the most famous economist from Canada, one of the top 5 trade economists on earth. And I have learned a lot from his work since I was a graduate student many years ago. And he's very innovative. He never stopped moving on. When we are still studying the old questions in international trade, he already jumped ahead to look at, let's say, the political economy of trade regulations. And also, free trade agreements and how they are interacting with domestic institutions and domestic politics. And today is another example how he has pushed the boundary of research to think about AI, the effect of AI on trade regulations, both within countries and also across countries. Without further ado, Professor Trefler, please.
I'm not sure that they're all deserved, but I'll take them anyways. Let me tell you a little bit about why I'm doing what I'm doing and how I arrived at this point. Can you hear me clearly in the back? Excellent. I had the privilege of working with a group of economists at something called the Canadian Institute for Advanced Research. And we were tasked with this question of what makes for some societies to be so successful and others, so unsuccessful. And it was really a remarkable small group. It turned out that we would produce 5 Nobel Prize winners from that group, all focused on this very difficult problem. You will know the most recent of them, which is Acemoglu and Robinson. And we just wanted to try and understand, especially for me, how I fit into that group was when international trade comes along, it can empower certain groups in the society who then push for their own self-interest. That sometimes works out well for society, but sometimes those people are pushing self-interest, which is really not good for governance, for politics, and which is not good for social outcomes like social mobility, polarization, inequality. So I was focused on this set of questions. I'm also at a business school, and at the business school, starting around 2015, there was a steady stream of computer scientists who were coming out of Jeff Hinton's research lab at the University of Toronto, appearing at the business school saying, how do we make money from this? So I got very interested in AI as well. Jeff Hinton's group was actually also at the Canadian Institute for Advanced Research. So there's sort of this very interesting moment when the Nobel Prize Committee came to Canada, to the Canadian Institute for Advanced Research, and said, you have been so successful in turning out these groups, like AI group, Successful Societies group. What's the secret sauce? Because we're thinking of trying to emulate what you do. And so he called a few of us in to explain how the groups functioned and what made them work. And Jeff said, well, I came from a psychology background, not a computer science background, and I really was not respected by my profession. I'm at the University of Toronto Computer Science Department. It's one of the great departments in the world, even before I got there. And they look at me, and I don't code, and I don't do any of the usual things, logic, if, and, or, else, when. None of those statements mean anything to me. So I had to find people that I could trust to work together, who respected each other. And he says, so I figured out a question that will tell me if I can work with this person. So I'm going to tell you that question now. Okay. The question is a cat male or female? Okay, so let's have a little vote here. How many people think that a cat is female? Ooh, there's some feline friends here. How many people think that's the most ridiculous question you've ever heard in your life? Okay, so all of you who raised your hand for that second part, you're off the committee. Jeff's point was that that AI is a statistical system. It's basically trying to distill the information that you give it using statistical modeling. And in some level, it's just intuitive. It's just intuitive. So when you ask DeepSeek this question, you might get the answer, a cat is female. I mean, you could imagine that as being its answer. Because it's statistically, there's a lot of books and literature and other data that was fed into it when it was pre-trained that would be saying that. So, so that's how I've gotten into this topic. And I spent a lot of time thinking about, even before I started thinking about AI, about scalable technologies. And for you to understand sort of the mental model I keep in my head about how scalable technologies affect society, let me take you through an example that I think you'll be very familiar with. And that will allow us to short circuit this discussion and move on to newer things. So when I think about, let's think about the United States after the Great Depression. 1928, the United States, over here, the United States was in pretty bad shape from a social perspective. 20% of all income generated in the economy that year went to the top 1%. We all agree that this is not a good social outcome. And then the Depression came along, and then a series of regulations, New Deal regulations came through that dramatically reduced the ability of banks and other large conglomerates to have an adverse impact on the economy. I'm going to here focus on finance and on banking, but we could look at other sectors as well. What had happened, actually I'm not sure if I need to show you this slide. Let me keep going. So then, so we think that the heyday of the United States is in the 50s and 60s. A great period of world dominance, but also great equality at home. Great, strong social movements for change that would be more inclusive. And then in the 1980s and the 1990s, things begin to change in the United States quite dramatically. And from the perspective of Wall Street, there's quite a few scalable technologies that are introduced that allow Wall Street to go from being something that was really not very important to the US economy. The New Deal, including what's called Glass-Steagall Act, meant that there was no interstate banking, which meant that Wall Street banks could really only cater to New York State citizens. So Wall Street was really not a big deal. But then we got a series, I won't take you through each of them, but we get a series of technologies that allow these Wall Street banks to circumvent interstate banking rules and to grow and to come to dominate banking throughout the US. And perhaps the most famous of these is derivatives. Right? And what do derivatives let you do? They let you take your capital base and leverage it. Well, we know that when you leverage, it creates risk. Wall Street had the brilliant idea that let's leverage and let our customers bear all that risk. Well, you don't get there so easily because there's regulators around, right? And the regulators are supposed to do something about that. So the first step in my conceptual thinking about the scalable technologies is the technology allows a small group of incumbent firms to enrich themselves dramatically or to build themselves up into a dominant position. And then they're going to take all of that, all the profits that they're earning, which in case of Wall Street by 2015, 40% of all profits in the United States were being booked by Wall Street. 40%. So they're taking all of this huge economic power that they have, and they take it to Washington. And they take it to the political system. So we move from economics to politics. And here, what Wall Street was trying to do was make sure that they could deregulate the financial system. Why deregulate it? Because things like derivatives, if they were regulated, they wouldn't be able to get the leverage that they were looking for. Okay, sometimes it's deregulation, sometimes it's refusal to regulate, as in the case of derivatives. And that leaves, people exposed. Which people? Many different types of people, but I think we want to focus on Main Street, the homeowners, for instance, whose mortgages were part of the subprime movement. So without the safeguards in place, because the political system had been corrupted, you get to see this huge financial crisis in 2007 with a huge impact on society, huge spike in inequality, lots of people losing their homes in various parts of the country, and according to the Dallas Fed, upwards of $14 trillion were lost by American households. It's a traumatic event, and it's one of the key factors that contributes to the political environment in the US today. A sense that the government, we were let down by government, that we need some new thinking, that we can't let anything like this ever happen again. Of course, now they have Trump, it's going to happen again, but that's another issue. So what it led to was the intense polarization, politically, socially, the decline in income mobility in the United States, the rise in inequality in the United States. So, and what you see by 2018 is that we're back to where we were in 1928. These are statistics that are very easy to get hold of. There's a website that carries sort of it's Piketty's website about world inequality. So if you want to see what China looks like, you probably don't want to see what China looks like. Go to the website. So here's my mental model. My mental model is that you have a scalable technology comes along. I don't want to explain why it came along at that particular junction, but it comes along, and it creates powerful interests in the economy. And those powerful interests want to protect their economic position. They want their incumbency status. They want to build monopolies around themselves. To do that, they go to the political system, and they distort the political system to get what they want. In this story I gave you, it was laws, but sometimes it's some things that are much more fundamental than laws. Sometimes it leads to workers' rights being heavily curtailed, and so on. And then this political capture leads to social outcomes which can be quite painful, quite divisive. So that's the model I keep in my head. The question is, does scale lead to this? Or is it possible that scale leads to the exact opposite, that leads to dynamic markets where nobody is overly strong, so that political systems because that leads to broad-based prosperity, political systems have to cater to broad base. They're no longer catering to special interests, so they develop policies which are good for everybody, and that in turn leads to great social outcomes. We don't know necessarily from scale-biased technologies which way we're going to go. Though I have to say, for the papers I've written on various historical epochs, it doesn't look pretty. It usually doesn't look pretty over very long periods of time. So let's turn to AI specifically. Let me just watch the times, make sure that I don't keep you here longer than you want to be here. So when we talk about AI, this is a common picture that we often look at, right? You've all seen some version of this sort of lights-off factory. And the salient feature of this picture, I'm not telling you anything that you don't know, is that there's no people in it. And when you see no people in it, most of us jump to the observation that this is a technological marvel. It's amazing. And then, and that it's very intentional, like we're trying to displace people here. And then we get to some serious concerns, like who owns these robots? And as robots become more and more driven by data and AI, who owns the AI? And you look at this picture and you start to think, well, it looks to me like we're headed for a negative outcome. Okay? So I want you to look at this picture again. Okay? And take away your preconceptions. You see nobody is in this factory. Why? There's nobody in this factory because if you put a person in this factory to work alongside the robots, that person would have their fingers cut off by the robot, have their arm cut off by the robot, they might lose their head to a robot. You cannot have humans this close to robots. It's dangerous. But AI offers a solution to that. There's now multiple robotics companies trying to work out human-friendly robots. In Canada, we have a number of companies like Kindred that literally the robots look like people, and we're making progress since the development of large language models. We're making huge progress in what those robots can do. And what will happen is, we are so much more dexterous than these robots are going to be for another very long time. So the question is, can we work next to the robots? The robots do certain tasks, like the ones that lead to lower back problems, and we do other tasks, like picking up, washers that these machines are simply incapable of doing. In other words, can we build some complementarities between humans and robots, and that's going to lead to potentially these wonderful outcomes. It makes humans more productive because they're being complemented by robots. It leads humans to do a different set of tasks than we've previously done, and those will be tasks that will be well-paying. And it leads, though you don't see it in this picture, it leads to, with robotics, speeding up things like pharmaceutical development, etc. It will lead to new products, which will also be beneficial to humanity. So look at this picture, and I think we jump to a conclusion that AI is going to be disastrous for humanity. But you need to look at this picture carefully. Maybe it isn't. It's just not clear. So the good news is that AI is set to bring us these enormous benefits. Enormous benefits. And anybody who tells me we need to regulate AI, I'm frequently in meetings in which the opening line is how we're going to regulate AI, instead of the opening line being, do we need to regulate AI? If we need to regulate AI, let's be specific. What is it about AI or the use case of that AI that needs to be regulated? Because otherwise, we could regulate out of existence a whole host of things that AI is just around the corner in developing. So, I see some of you are taking pictures of this. I'm not even going to go through this list. Why? I don't know if you can guess why I wouldn't even go through a list like this. Because I just got ChatGPT to develop it. Right? I'll give you some lists later that maybe ChatGPT couldn't have developed. But this, if you want to know what AI is doing, I keep getting in regulatory meetings with bodies like the OECD, WTO, but Dan, we don't get it. What exactly is AI doing? And I'm always puzzled by it for international trade. I'm always puzzled by why don't you just ask ChatGPT? You will get a good answer. That's the good news, that there's going to be a whole host of terrific products. But there's some bad news, and I think we can already see the bad news. I'll focus on economics, but the implications for politics and society, I think, will be very, very apparent. just think about the Magnificent Seven. So we're talking about companies like Facebook, Apple, Microsoft, etc. Their market cap as a share of the Standard & Poor of the U.S. Dow Jones, the U.S. index. In 2012, that's a cool year to look at. 2012 is when Jeff Hinton won the ImageNet competition, and suddenly all of the major tech companies in the world came on bended knee to Jeff and said, "Can you teach us how to do this stuff?" So it's the beginning of commercialization. Literally, the closest we got to neural networks, deep learning being used for a product, was Siri, Apple Siri, which was just being developed at the end of 2011. And it was horrible. It's still actually, I'm shocked at how horrible it is compared to ChatGPT. You know, if I want transcription, I just ask ChatGPT. I'm going to talk to you. I want you to transcribe. 2025 comes along. 33, a third of all US market capitalization is by the Magnificent Seven. And that's a major understatement because companies like OpenAI are private. So it's much bigger than this. And 7 of the top 10 richest men on the planet, actually start thinking about Bezos and Musk, maybe even off the planet, they are here because of what has happened to the Magnificent Seven. And that should be worrisome to us because those people, especially in this last election cycle in the US, have migrated to Washington. I don't know if you've ever heard this, the famous discussion between Zuckerberg and Bill Gates. When Zuckerberg was just starting out, he had a meeting with Bill Gates, and Bill Gates said, well, really, the first thing you need to learn is you need an office in Washington. That was Bill Gates' first advice to Zuckerberg. And we're seeing, especially, it's on steroids now under the current US administration, that Silicon Valley has, just like Wall Street came to Washington, Silicon Valley has now come to Washington. And you see it even today in the announcement by a Washington insider, Elon Musk. He's a Washington insider. He wants to buy OpenAI. What do you think the regulatory environment will be when Musk is giving advice about how we regulate AI, and he's the owner of the biggest AI company on the planet? It's scary. It's telling me that we're not moving in the direction of good outcomes, we're moving in the direction of bad outcomes. Now, there's something new about AI that I've never seen in any other scalable technology. And what's new is that I have always seen scalable technologies leading to a cascade from economics to politics to society. But when it comes to AI, it's not just a cascade. Because AI has direct impacts on politics. Just give me a moment to make sure that I stay on time here. This is the first time I've given this talk. So, all right. So what is it that AI does to politics that we've never seen with other scalable technologies? Well, there's 2 things that strike me. One I would put under the rubric of the Silicon Valley or hacker ethos. And what is that ethos? You've all heard about it in some form. One of them is that free speech trumps all other rights that we might feel are important. Like other rights might be the right to health, the right to privacy. There's many other rights that we might want to consider. All of that goes out the window. What matters is free speech. And so a free society becomes synonymous with the free internet. And by free internet, I mean all of the fake news that comes with the free internet. Another part of this hacker ethos is that regulation kills innovation. Now, I have often said that regulation in an infant industry and a new technology does kill innovation. But now we're talking about something that's maturing rapidly. And when things mature rapidly, you might want to reconsider what role regulation has. there have been no studies that I have seen about whether regulation kills AI. The standard argument that it's, GDPR, the European data protections is the reason why Europe doesn't have a major AI company, I find completely unpersuasive. There are so many other factors that are happening in Europe. Why you're picking on GDPR, I think, is because you've bought it, you've drunk the Kool-Aid. You're bought into the hacker ethos. But what that comes down to in practice is that if you want better AI, you're going to need to give big tech unfettered access to your data. Another part of this is that AI is needed to contain Chinese expansion. Now a security issue. And I'm sure you're hearing the reverse in the mainland, right? That China needs to develop AI to contain the US. So this is like so much potential for this technology, and what our main concern is how we can use it for war. It's really disheartening. Another part of the way in which AI directly affects politics is the actual algorithms themselves. The echo chambers, the filter bubbles, the algorithmic amplifications. None of us have escaped that, right? None of us have escaped that. And that has a number of implications. First, it allows extreme politicians to communicate directly with their users. Now, there's nothing wrong with politicians being able to communicate directly with their voters, but extreme politicians have had amplification of their voice. And they're purveyors of fake news, they're purveyors of misinformation, purveyors of hate. All of this is now part of the mainstream of US political life and of European political life. And this is all AI driven. This is all because AI, unlike previous scalable technologies, not only affects the economy, it affects the way politics is conducted. We see the death of truth. So many voters are now completely misinformed about what is fact and what is fiction. And that has led to a huge amount of political polarization. So again, big impacts directly on politics. And this amplified vilification, and maybe I'll skip that. There's another new challenge of AI that I've never seen with other scalable technologies. And that is that AI has direct impacts on society. When we invented the steam engine, nobody talked about the direct impacts on society. We talked about its impacts on the economy, and then that had implications for society. But here, it's feeding directly into social outcomes. So, for example, we have what I would call an addiction to outrage. And what do I mean by that? Well, AI companies have long, for as long as I've been following this space, been interested in neuroscience and the neuroscience of emotions. And they've come to understand that if you want people to engage with what you're presenting to them, you have to evoke emotions. And there's an asymmetry, right? The asymmetry is making people happy will keep them engaged. If you're like me, you're just endless cat videos. But that's not going to be something that you're going to be able to monetize. If you want to monetize, you want to get a really visceral reaction, you have to get anger. That's the emotion that you can monetize. And so we see the internet is full of outrageous statements. It's not an accident. It's carefully planned, thought out by the people who run these algorithms. And the understanding how the algorithms work then leads people to piggyback on those algorithms. People like Jones, who, with his InfoWars, endless spewing of lies about, no children were killed in that massacre. It was all actors and it's all fake news. So this addiction to outrage drives a great deal of angst and frustration in society. And it's not just the outrage. There's many components of it. We'd be hard pressed to go through all of them. But another thing that it does is health outcomes. Why am I focusing on health? Two reasons. One is there's a famous example of why we should be nervous about how AI directly affects society, and that's the famous case broke by the Wall Street Journal, in which Facebook has long known that Instagram is extremely harmful to the mental health of young females. And they did nothing about it. Nothing, even though they carefully documented that this was happening. These companies are not to be trusted. More generally, and shockingly, 40% of all fake news is about health. You might ask yourself, why is 40% of all news about health? Because that's where the money is, right? Because that's what you can monetize. And the implications for society, the US COVID response was much, much weaker than it should have been. Many, many more people died than should have died. And we continue to have a rise of anti-vaxxers like Kennedy, that Trump tried to nominate for a health secretary. Right? So we have this extraordinary impact of AI directly on social outcomes. We've never seen that before. So this is a picture that leads me not to say that we have to regulate AI out of existence, because there's so many extraordinary things that AI is going to deliver to humanity, but it makes me concerned that we need some kind of regulation for some parts of it. Okay, so let me turn now to international trade with that framework in mind. Excellent. Okay, so AI, just to give you some sampling of things that you might, so you get the feel of how AI impacts international trade. And it's just a sampling. If you're if you're a young person thinking about whether you should be a software developer, don't, right? Just don't. I don't see any point in programming anymore. I just ask ChatGPT. Why bother? Finance has been, employment in the US has been decimated by both the AI algorithms and also the new products, the fintech products that are now directly competing. Like US banks no longer deal with mortgages. It's all been hived off to fintech. This is where large language models have had their biggest impact, in chatbots. And they're used in so many different ways in business. There's a lot of money in this for ChatGPT and for DeepSeek as well, I'm sure. But this has implications for national competitiveness. Countries where call centers have been important, it could get ugly. And we're only just early in on this process. Remember, what we call ChatGPT, the technology that we call ChatGPT, stems from something called a transformer, and the first article on that subject was 2017. 2017. We're barely 8 years into this process. So much more is coming. Law is likely to be decimated. Pharma is likely to produce huge innovations that we've never had access to before. Green technologies like solar and wind are going to hopefully be revolutionized with, and in part through new materials. And new materials themselves will mean a transformation of what and how we manufacture. So in particular, I'm thinking about additive manufacturing, 3D printing. If we have, the reason that 3D printing has not really taken off in this planet is largely because we don't have the materials that would really make it a unique manufacturing process. That will change. It'll change as AI develops, as quantum develops, to help us do that. But when it comes, we might be thinking about a massive reshoring by the West away from China. It's possible. I don't know yet. Right now what we see is that China is building massive 3D printing farms. So I don't know where it's going to take us, but it may take us far from where we are today. And China will have to be on guard in that. China's rare earth strategy is based on our understanding of, for example, battery technology today. But our understanding of battery technology today may be revolutionized by AI. I mean, for example, instead of lithium batteries, maybe we'll be talking about sulfur batteries within a decade. Sulfur is not a product that anybody can monopolize. It's everywhere on the planet. So China has to be careful about this rare earth policy. And just as the US is trying to tighten the screws on China with semiconductors, and that's led to China innovating around the problem, well, maybe the rest of the world will innovate around the problem of China's monopolization of rare earth. Not saying that will happen, but it's something that if I was thinking strategically, I'd want to know about. Other areas, it's already happening, and it's going to happen in spades. Trade facilitation, China is shipping massive amounts of products to the rest of the planet. It's very hard to process all those things at customs. AI will definitely be helpful, and that may actually reduce some trade frictions, like US concerns about fentanyl precursors. Maybe those could be identified with AI. Logistics firms, a whole host of things are just beginning to happen in logistics firms. That logistics firms always sounds boring, right? But when you're in management consulting, it's really important, because I, as a major logistics company, know all the contracts of suppliers and their clients in extraordinary detail. The problem is it's too much for me to assimilate. And I haven't been able to exploit the richness that I have in the data. Well, that's going to change. And that's going to put screws on suppliers. Beware. But I think the main point is what Professor Tang was talking about over lunch, and that really we talk so much about manufacturing but not about services. So I want to talk specifically about services. In particular, I've been spending a lot of time studying mobile apps. So the mobile app market has exploded over recent years, as you can imagine. These are hard numbers to know, like what is $586 billion? Is that a lot or is that a little? ChatGPT will generate the picture for you. To give you a sense, the EV market is around 200 billion. Semiconductors is around 600 billion. This mobile apps market is a big market. And we don't really talk that much about it from the economic perspective. So the first point about mobile apps is that they are extremely globalized in a way that's inconceivable in other products. A typical manufacturing firm, if it's export-oriented, will ship maybe 20%, maybe 30% of its product abroad. A typical e-platform company, say like Alibaba's B2B, will ship maybe 50% of its product abroad. By that I mean 50% of the people visiting the site will be from abroad. It's something fundamentally different in mobile apps. So let me give you an example of TikTok. About 50%, so what I have here is the number of foreign users of your product as a share of all of your users. So this is the share of non-Chinese users of TikTok. And that is about 50% for TikTok. But TikTok is nowhere near the extreme. This is the percentage of firms that are less globalized than TikTok, or putting in reverse, 80% of firms of mobile apps have a larger foreign user share than TikTok. How much larger? You might get a little sense for the fact that when I get to 60% of the mobile apps, I'm already at 1. So there's like 40% of apps, all their users are foreign. But if you take a look at the big apps, Facebook, Google Chrome, WhatsApp, etc., all of those are in the 80 to 90% range. 80 to 90% of their users are foreign, non-US. And it's super interesting when you look at the major Chinese apps. WeChat, Alipay, those are the two biggest. Barely any foreign users. So something is happening in the Chinese ecosystem, or the world ecosystem, that is really keeping Chinese apps out of play. Something that China needs to address. So let me tell you about some data that I'm using. We have a data set with about 1,000 firms. Those are the firms that do almost all of the big apps on the planet. Those firms have 28,000 mobile apps. They have they hold 60,000 AI patents. And so what we did is we made 1 trillion API calls to Google's large language model to try and figure out which of these mobile apps uses which of these AI patents. So we know which mobile apps are AI enabled. And the first conclusion we get from this massive database is when AI is deployed in a mobile app, the number of foreign users increases by a factor of 3.5. So you're not doubling your foreign users. You're not tripling them. It's a factor of 3.5, a 350% increase. It's really staggering how this scalable technology scales. And this is done through careful analysis so that we make sure that this is a causal statement. Thing to remember when we talk about this is digital services exports. So just to help you get your head around it. I came here today, I took out my phone, opened up my Google Maps app. Dan Trefler from Canada is in Hong Kong and asking, because before I came here I needed a cup of coffee, asking, find a coffee shop near me. And up came a sponsored link. A firm in Hong Kong catering to a Canadian is paying royalties to Google in Silicon Valley for getting a sponsored ad. Staggering. It's really staggering. So this is the new world of international trade, the brave new world of international trade. And the other thing to realize is it's generating these superstar firms that I was very concerned about gaining monopoly positions in the economy. So it's feeding directly into my cascade. Okay. The next big topic that we have to deal with, I have to be cautious of the time. I'm running over here, right? We need to finish at 1.
It's fine. You can take 10 more minutes for the Q&A.
Okay, let me make sure I don't go. Okay. We need to worry about regulation of AI. Why? Because countries are taking strong positions on this. For example, China has very strong restrictions on the export of Chinese data. The opposite extreme of China is the US, which has very intentionally said we will not regulate data. Okay, that's the hacker's ethos. So regulations restricting cross-border data flows have been building massively over time. And our second conclusion is that this huge effect from AI, that 3.5 factor, is halved in countries which have strong data flow restrictions. So what are those countries? It's going to be China, Russia, Indonesia, Egypt. So what that tells us is that regulations are effective in reducing the impact of AI. Whether this is good or bad for society, that's an open question. I'll just give you a flavor of why that would be a difficult question. When our children are spending hours on a game, do we call that game a good, in which case it's welfare improving, or is it a bad? I don't know. So there's a whole set of questions now that we're going to have to deal with that we have never dealt with before. Why are Chinese apps not global? This is really something that needs to be thought out, because sometimes I feel like in China there's a view that this is all very intentional US suppression. And I don't think that's entirely true. It's partly true, but it's not entirely true. It has to do with trust. Many of the goods that we ship have a trust component. Here's a child getting a vaccine. And when we look at this good, why do we trust that this vaccine is doing what we're told it's doing? How do we know it's not harmful? How do we know it's ineffective? So we have a doctor who's certified by their peers. That is to say, we trust in civil society. We have drugs approved by a trusted regulator. In the US, that would be the Food and Drug Administration, the FDA. So we have trust in government. We have other levels of trust. if there is a problem with the vaccine, I know, at least in the United States, that I could go to the courts and hold the companies accountable. Again, trust in the legal system. So in a complex society, trust is very complex. There's many layers of trust. Now, it used to be that when China shipped goods to the United States, we didn't have to worry about trust. You ship the blue jeans to the United States, trust is not an issue. You might get aggravated the zipper doesn't work, but you can live with that. China, of course, has always had to trust the United States because the U.S. ships sophisticated goods to China. You have to trust that this plane was going to make it across the Pacific and not making it only halfway across the Pacific. You had to trust that it wasn't full of electronic devices, which occasionally we now know it was. So while China has always dealt with these trust issues, it's new for U.S. Because now, Facebook continues this trust issue that the Chinese have to deal with. And of course, the Chinese have banned Facebook. But now the US is in the same position. We're taking goods from China where trust matters. And these goods are becoming an increasingly important share of Chinese exports to the rest of the world. And of course, the US response, like the Chinese response, has been, no, we don't trust it. And that's only the thin edge of the wedge, because we've already seen Huawei. I know in China that's seen entirely as there is no excuse for the US trying to ban Huawei. But in the US, there's articulated arguments for 5G technology is fundamentally different than 4G technology, and that creates new, in its distributed engineering, and that creates new risks that we haven't seen before with older generations of technology. BYD, as much as BYD tries to penetrate foreign markets, it's still going to be true that BYD is generating huge amounts of data about the drivers. And we're going to have to figure out how to have mutual trust if we want to have mutual penetration of EVs. I don't know where that's going to fall, but it's a huge risk. Likewise for the drone technology and many other technologies that China is going to develop over time. China's going to increasingly be asking the rest of the world, trust us. And that trust may not be forthcoming. So we're going to see lots and lots of frictions. Let me try and summarize. AI and international trade, where are we headed? There's the traditional impacts, this cascade, which could be negative or positive, but there's new things that we haven't ever experienced before, which makes me both excited about the prospects of AI and also very much aware that we need a precautionary principle, which to make sure that AI does not take us over, that AI leads to good social outcomes. And I think this is a sort of a nice way of summarizing. It's an old quote by Kai-Fu Lee, who is very omniscient, in his old book, AI Superpowers. He writes, as AI companies in the United States and China accumulate more data and talent, the gap between the global haves and have-nots will widen. The AI world order will combine winner-take-all economics with an unprecedented concentration of wealth in the hands of a few companies in China and the United States. The world order will look very different. And that may seem benign if you're in China or the United States, but it turns out that actually most of the world doesn't live in China or the United States. And these statements about the global haves and have-nots apply equally to the domestic have and have-nots. And this is going to create new tensions that we've already seen. In the US, we're seeing this political fragmentation that's being caused by AI-driven recommenders and the polarization that it's leading to politically and socially. And in China, we're seeing China will probably have to move to an even greater surveillance state mode as AI creates new ways in which the desires of the party can be undermined. This is a brave new era. Thank you.